Hello, all my entrepreneurs and business leaders, and welcome to the Michael Esposito Show, where I interview titans of industry in order to inform, educate, and inspire you to be great. My guest today started her business at 25 years old with only $25 in her pocket. Since then, she has transformed her business into a successful helicopter flight school and service. She has grappled with personal loss, created a foundation in memory of her late husband, and still continues to fly high and inspire all of us. She is the CEO of Independent Helicopters. Please welcome Heather Howley.
I feel like there should be like a big applause.
There is. There's a big applause on the other side of this speaker here.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm so excited to have you. I've heard so much about you. As you know, when you walked into the studio, everybody said that too. They go, I've heard so much about you. But I did hear so much about you because my first introduction to you, and I didn't even get to meet you, was when I chaired the Taste of New Paltz.
Oh my goodness, that was a while ago.
2017, I think it was, or 18.
Yeah.
And you brought your helicopter and were giving flights out to, well, people were paying, but flying everybody around the Gunks and around the Hudson Valley region. And it was so cool. We had such great feedback from that. But you were busy that whole day, so I never got to meet you that day.
Yeah, it was very, very busy. It's one of our busier events, I would say. And now that, obviously with COVID and everything, things have died down dramatically. But we haven't been doing a whole lot of events, and I kind of miss it. I miss taking people up and showing them what it is that I love to do. So.
Yeah, the events, being part of the chamber and all the other things, that is something that I miss. It's COVID has that bittersweetness to it of it's introduced video to everyone and to where people are comfortable having a video conference, a video meeting, a video event and everything. But on the other side of that, the live events, you can't video chat somebody a helicopter flight, right?
I mean, you can. It's not the same. Yeah, it's not the same.
Simulator is not the same.
No.
What's really cool to your story here for me that stands out, at least off the paper that is, and there's a lot more to what's cool about your story, is $25 at 25 years old.
Yeah. What was I thinking?
What were you thinking? 25 years old, we think we know everything. And at 40 now, I just turned 40. We learned that we know nothing, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Tell me about that journey to 25 and what you were doing before that led to this.
So if I go even back further, because people always ask, what got you into flying and things like that. So I was a biology major, and I had worked at a stem cell research facility out in California. I was a vet tech for quite some time. And I loved all of that. And then I started flying. I traveled a little bit and loved it, and then was like, oh, maybe I'll actually start flying myself. And so I started flying, came back to New York to work. So I trained in California and Colorado. Came back to New York, was working for a company that went bankrupt. And then I started working for another company, and I saw all these students that really needed a little bit of help from the bankrupt school. So I was like, oh, why don't I lease a helicopter and do a DBA, which I had no clue at the time what a DBA, LLC, Incorporated, any of that meant. And so I was like, well, it's $25 to get my DBA, and I can lease the helicopter, not have to pay for it right away. And I know where the helicopter is. I know I'm just going to go. I'm just going to leap without looking, and hopefully I build my wings on the way down kind of thing. And so the $25 was for my DBA. The first month I had no students. Second month I had one student, I think, who prepaid for 10 hours, which is what got me through that last month to pay my bills. And it was rough. But looking back on it now, if I knew what I know now when I started the business, I don't know if I would have done it. The liability and the I don't know, it's scary what we do. And not flying helicopters per se, but the things that are involved with all of that. And as much as I love it, knowing what I know now, I probably would have just gone to Alaska and started flying there instead. I wouldn't trade it for the world. I love my business. I love what I do. But it was probably better not knowing at the time. That's
interesting. And I know we're probably going to jump ahead with this question, but while we're on it, what do you know now then?
Oh, goodness. So team is very important, and that's not just the people who you work with and work for, but also the lawyers, the accountants, the mentors, everyone else that is part of your team is so crucial. And I remember when I first started it, independent is the name of the business, right? And so I was very independent. It was just me. And I would walk around with my laptop bag and find whatever room I could and just do it on my own. And there was so much that I didn't know. I didn't know how to really talk to people. I didn't know how to manage people. I didn't know how to build a schedule, how to do the accounting stuff or the HR stuff that came once I got more people. So I've learned as I've grown, which has been really awesome because I started small and was able to sort of grow with the company as a person, as a business owner, et cetera. So
yeah. Well, at 25, what's really great about 25, and I kind of said it earlier, is that you think you know everything, which is great. That ego takes away that fear, which sometimes as entrepreneurs, many times as entrepreneurs, that fear is what stops them from taking that leap of faith, like you said, leap without looking, which I love that line. That's so great. But then you obviously learned that you needed those things and started implementing. And I think we'll talk about that process. I do think that that's cool. So the DBA was $25 and that's how that all worked out. Yeah. So for entrepreneurs out there, that's one great way to start a business is just getting a DBA. Yeah. But then obviously you want to become more formal and get an LLC or incorporate or whatever it is. But you have to obviously speak to an accountant or
which I didn't do at the time either. I literally was like, LLC sounds good. I did my research. I was like, that's what we're going to be.
I formed many LLCs the same way I've formed many LLCs. So tell us, so what did get you into the flying and this passion that you have for flying? Because you've talked about it in my questionnaire that I have for you. I feel like it came up several times with this love for flying. So what was your first flight? What was it? What was it like? And
okay, so that's a multi-part question.
Sure.
I feel like. So when I was probably 5 or maybe 8 years old, my father had a guy who he was friends with who took us up in the airplane, and we did my first flight that I can remember in the airplane. And at the time, I never thought, I could be a pilot. It was never something that I really wanted to do. It was no one in my family flies, so it wasn't ever something that was in the foreground for me. And when I traveled, I took a summer abroad, went to Europe, and really enjoyed traveling and flying around. And I thought, again, speaking to my independence, right? Why would I pay someone else to fly me around if I can do it myself? And so I had moved to California at this point, and I was there, and I was like, maybe I'll start fixed wing, right? Because I didn't even think about helicopters, wasn't even a thought in my brain. And I had a female instructor, which were very rare. There's only 6% of the aviators out there are women, and that's in airplanes, helicopters, space shuttles, whatever. There's only 6% that are women. And so to have a female instructor, she was my first mentor, I would say. And she said, you should really look at helicopters. And I was like, helicopters? I'd never thought about them. No lie, a week later, an ad comes on the radio, and it's come for your free helicopter ride. It was a school in San Diego. They were trying to get new people to come in. They were hosting the seminar, and they were giving away free helicopter rides. And I can remember going on that first ride, and literally as soon as we took off of the ground, I was like, oh my God, this is exactly what I need to be doing. And I just, love it first flight, really. It was amazing.
How old were you in that experience?
22.
22. So only 3 years later you decided.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. You mentioned something while we were just talking before about being afraid of heights. Yeah. So you don't just develop a fear of heights. You've always had it. So when you took off in that helicopter, did that fear go away? Did you recognize that fear?
Yeah. So I think, and maybe it's I could use my terminology a little bit better, right? So it's the fear of falling and actually being injured or dying, right? So the fear of heights, it's actually an adrenaline boost for me. So, people do things to kind of get their adrenaline pumping and to get excited. Right. And so when I fly, I get very excited, and that passion comes through very strong for me when I'm flying because I do have that little bit of fear. And it's not enough to keep me grounded or to, keep me from doing it, but it is enough to make it that much more exciting. So it's like why people go skydiving, right? They need that thrill. I
don't know. I've thought about skydiving, and then I hear about people that like break their legs when they land. And I'm like, you know what? I love basketball and skiing too much. Yeah. I love basketball and skiing more than I would want to skydive. Yeah. So I'm okay not skydiving. But you and I talked a while back about taking me up in a helicopter, and I've never been in a helicopter. Part of what would scare me a little bit is maybe some of the height that I can't speak to too much because I've been in planes and stuff and looked out the window, and it's really cool to see the scenery below and everything. But I think about like the claustrophobia aspect of it.
Not at all. So it's funny. People who are afraid to fly in airplanes. I had a guy who's a student of mine. He would take like 2 gin and tonics to go fly in an airplane. And not actually pilot it, obviously, but as a passenger. And he said that flying in the helicopter is a completely different experience. It's like a magic carpet ride, or like you're floating, kind of think Willy Wonka at the end where they're floating around in that little capsule like over everything. It's all windows. You can see everything. And it's very peaceful, honestly. It's as if you're floating above everything and enjoying it from up there. Yeah.
So what do you do with somebody who is scared when you bring them up as
I've had that,
as a student?
I won't say her name, but someone who was also in radio came up with me, and she told me, she said, listen, I'm really, really afraid, and I don't know if I can do it. I said, okay, well, are you okay trying? Like everybody, if you can make it through the first 5 minutes, no matter how scared you are,
right.
if you can make it through the first 5 minutes, you're going to be fine. I promise. It just takes that. We are so mental, right? You think so much and you're like, oh my God, this could happen, that could happen, or I'm so afraid. And that's the story you keep telling yourself while you're up there. Then of course that's the reaction you're going to get. Mm-hmm. But if you can make it through those first 5 minutes, you'll be fine. She didn't make it more than like, I think 3 minutes. And she's like, I can't. And she started hyperventilating and I wouldn't say I'm mean, but I started laughing because I thought it was funny. It wasn't funny for her. But we ended up turning around and coming back. And out of all of the, I would say thousands of people that I've taken flying,
right.
there have only been 2 that have said, I need to go back down and land.
Okay.
Yeah, because everyone's afraid at first. You don't know what to experience, what it's going to be like or what you're going to experience or anything. My mother was one of my first passengers, and she screamed when we picked it up off the ground, which of course I laughed. It was the best time ever. But she made it through the first 5 minutes, and now my mother is probably the one person that's been up with me the most out of anybody else. Yeah.
Wow,
yeah.
That's pretty good to hear.
Yeah.
Maybe I will take you up on that. Maybe I will.
You should. I always tell people try everything once, right? You don't have to like continue to do it, but I don't know, what are we here to do, right? Experience life and why not try it?
Yes, I agree with that 1,000%. I have been taking mindful living coaching programs, and I have a really great coach, Matt. He was actually on the show a couple times, and about being present and enjoying the moment that you're in. And so going up in a helicopter could be a very enjoyable moment for me,
really
I'm sure.
It really is. It's funny. So just a sidebar real quick. So I teach a lot still. And so some of my students, we do auto rotations, whereas you roll the engine to idle, right? And so you're basically gliding through the air without the power of the engine. So if you have an engine failure, which I've had as well, that's essentially what you're practicing. A lot of students get very nervous because they don't know what to expect. It's scary. The ground is rushing up at you, like all of these things. And I always try and tell them, relax into the experience. If you can just slow things down, you'll be fine. And that's the same thing with your first flight. Like if you can just be present, calm yourself in the moment, you'll be fine.
And it's like that with a lot of things in life. I mean, even just the podcast, even doing this, the show, sometimes there's nerves that goes into this. My guests sometimes have nerves, and I kind of like the same advice, right? It's like, hey, have you spoken to somebody at a party? Mm-hmm. This is what we're doing here, right? It's definitely a little bit more formal, but like you just said, you relax into the experience. I want to go back to your dad and flying with you at 5 years old. Mm-hmm. So you said he wasn't a pilot. So when you're talking about flying, are you talking commercial? Or are you talking about a private plane of some sort?
So yeah, like a small 4-seater.
Okay.
And he had worked with this gentleman who was a pilot and had his own airplane. And I mean, I remember very little of the experience other than it kind of felt like a roller coaster because the guy was trying to have some fun with us.
Okay.
And I mean, I was so little, I barely remember.
Right.
Yeah.
So it was like a random opportunity that your dad had, and he was like, "Oh, I'm going to bring Heather with me," kind of thing. Yep. Cool. So that was so it's wild because we think about, so for me with my daughters, I had the opportunity to come on the radio here with them. Mm-hmm. Well, I had the opportunity to come on the radio, and I invited them because I was thinking very similar to what your dad probably was thinking with you, is like, I want to expose them to these different things because you just don't know how it's going to impact them in their lives. And how did your dad ever know, right, that little 5-year-old Heather would become a helicopter pilot?
No, I don't think anyone ever, because like I said, no one in my family flies. So it was never a blip on the radar for anybody. Yeah.
But it was an experience that stuck with you, and you still remember. That's really awesome.
I wish I could remember his name, the pilot, honestly. Like I'd like to go back and say, hey, thanks, for starting that.
Yeah. Wow. I'm sure in some way he can feel that gratitude in the universe with what you're doing today if he knows who you are. Yeah. So let's go to the 25-year-old Heather then, right? And starting this business as a DBA, you go online. Walk us through the entrepreneurial path that you took there before you knew that you knew nothing, when you thought you knew everything. Let's go to that day that you were on the .gov site filing for that DBA. What were some of the thoughts? What were some of the feelings that you had that were going through?
So it's interesting because when I started this business, I didn't start it with the intention of keeping the business. Like I started it, I wanted to get my flight time and then go to Alaska because that was my dream job, was to go out there and fly out there. Yeah. And at the time, I don't even think they had it on .gov. And if they did, I didn't know about it.
Whatever,
so I went to the Ulster County, I think, town clerk and chatted with the woman there. And I just filled out the paperwork and I talked with her. And really my intention behind getting the DBA was that way I had a business name. Obviously, I didn't want to do it as Heather Howley. But to have that business name to then be able to reach out to these students who, had been left by the bankrupt school. My intention for starting the business was literally just to help those students that were basically abandoned by that other school. And ironically, they're the people who didn't even come and fly with me. So
that's funny.
Yeah.
I want to talk about the name independent, but first, just going back to this to help the other students, it's so interesting because when you think about starting a business, when you think about being an entrepreneur or whatever it is, you're looking for a solution. You believe in your heart that you have the right solution, and that's why you leave the job, or that's why you're starting this path or building this new thing. And so you felt that you had the solution. Mm-hmm. What did you think you could do different than this bankrupt school that maybe had all the answers, right? They had the accounting team, they had the law team that you talk about, right? Yeah. They went bankrupt. Why did you think?
So, goodness, that's a great question. I would say the short answer is a lot of people saw that bankrupt school as like a pyramid. And so they thought that it was very top heavy, right? So a lot of people were taking money from the business more or less and not really thinking about the student. And the way that I've always been and still am and how I teach is really I think about the student first and myself second, right? So if I'm helping the students from the bankrupt school, it was literally to get them to their goals and secondarily get me to mine, really.
So their success, your success was a byproduct to their success. Yeah. And the top heavy you find a lot in the big corporations. I can't think of the name of one of them that I just learned about. That it's an insurance carrier. That's what it was. And I'm not going to name it actually, but it is an insurance carrier that I just heard about that has become very top heavy, and because of that, it's forcing out a lot of their agents, and then of course the agents. We're the front. I'm an insurance broker, as I think you know that already. We're the people who the customers deal with. So like they don't care about the carrier a lot of the times. They don't care which carrier it is. They just say Michael's my agent, and that's who I want to work with. This carrier is forgetting that, and they're a captive carrier, so I don't even work with them. Meaning that their agents only represent them, and by them being so top heavy, they're forgetting about this front line, these agents. And so I think eventually what's going to happen is exactly what you're talking about is the customers are going to see that as their agent leaves, they're going to go, well, why am I with this carrier? I can go anywhere, right? I'm going to follow that agent to wherever that agent goes. So it's true, I think, in so many businesses that we see this.
I wonder if that's true with all the big businesses, if they all start getting top heavy as they grow. Yeah. Yeah. Something to be, I guess, concerned about as you grow, so that way you don't forget.
You have to be very mindful of it. I mean, you talk about having a coach, and I have a business coach, and it is something that I'm very mindful of as I'm building this business. So starting my insurance company, I want to become big. I want to have the accounting team and all these different teams inside of the organization, but I also still want to keep that personal touch. But I think as generations pass, as it passes through generations, that could get lost if it's not really planned for. Yeah. Because while I am the key person now, if my daughters take over and then their children take over, they're so many times removed from my vision and my plan and my intentions for the business that maybe money does, who knows? Yeah. I don't know. I can't speak for that. I hope not. I hope that I ingrained the good philosophy of
values, right? And so that's what you start the business with is whatever those values are, and that's what has to be ingrained into the culture. To that way, it can move forward with the rest of the business.
Yeah, and so you ended up having to develop a culture, and so part of the way that you developed this culture when you were 25 was by naming your business. And the name Independent, and you chose that name very carefully. I feel it.
Oh goodness!
So tell us about that story there about independent and choosing that word.
So I was working for another company. So the bankrupt school went bankrupt. I was working for the other company, and I was basically an independent contractor with them. And I was like, independent contractor. I'm in New York State, right? I always think independence, freedom, et cetera, when I think of those things. And I was like, sure, we'll just make it Independent Helicopters. That was literally how the business name got started. And it's interesting to me that I subconsciously or consciously chose that name, and it literally describes my personality, the roles that I want, the culture, basically, like you said. So when I have students that come through or my clients or staff that comes through, I want them to be and feel independent. Like I don't want to babysit. I don't want to hold hands. I will guide you and I will help you. But really, I want everyone to be independent. Figure it out on your own. You can do it. I'll be here to help you and guide you and point you in the right direction. But I will not, spoon feed. But independent did not come from, it was not a well thought out.
Well, it's interesting though, because it's like that's that subconscious, right? Yeah. Like for some reason it came about by being an independent contractor, but it meant something to you enough to where you named your business. Yeah. independent. Yeah. Did you eventually get an LLC or corporation?
Yeah, LLC. And then I've now started like 2 or 3 other ones. So.
And you got insurance?
Yeah, it's all God, yeah. That's honestly, insurance is probably our biggest expense.
Of course you do. Yeah. I could only imagine. Mm-hmm. Well, no, actually, I probably know.
Yeah, with 9 helicopters, it's quite a lot. Yeah. Not to mention all the other things that businesses have to get insurance for. So
there's a lot of things. So let's go to your team now, right? Because so you've grown this business, and what was the very first piece that you added to this team that you say is what you wish you knew now, right? What you know now is you wish you knew then. What was one of the first pieces that you added to this?
That's a great question. I think initially it was, I added a flight instructor, another pilot first. Okay. Because I couldn't handle the business that we were doing. I needed another person. So I would say a flight instructor is the first, and then after that, it was probably my accountant. I've now gone through several accountants, and I'm pretty happy with the guy I have now. And then, goodness, what came out? And then I think it was my coach. Oh no, I had a relationship with the bank after that, and then it was my coach. Yeah, and then my coach was the first person to ever tell me that you really need to get your team together. Like your team is the most important part. And I was like, I don't even know. I don't know if I can afford them. I don't know who these people are. I don't even know what to look for when I'm interviewing these companies or these people. Like I literally was completely and totally lost. And she helped guide a little bit, but she's very good in the fact that she doesn't tell me what to do. Like she'll guide me in the right direction, very much independent, right? So she and I fit very well. But I really had no. And
you still work with her?
Yeah, I love her. So when my husband died...
You can give her a plug.
Yeah, so Amy DeWitowitz, she's amazing. And she does a lot of different things. She's currently in Florida, I think, or California. She's all over the map. But when my husband died, I had literally worked with her for 6 months before he died. And I was like, just before he died, I was literally thinking about canceling my services with her. I'm like, I don't know, do I really need her? It's a big expense for me. Like, I don't think it's a good thing, da-da-da. And then he died. And like literally that day, I was going to tell him that I was thinking about firing her. And she was one of the first 3 people that I called. She's probably the second person that I called, to be honest. And I could not have gotten through that experience without her, period. And not just personally, but with the business as well. Like I literally, and this, not to sound cold or harsh or anything, but from my husband's death, I learned so much. But my business has tripled since then. Tripled. And part of it is because I didn't have the distraction of being in a relationship, and I really took all that grief and energy and focused it into the business. So it was a huge, that's all I did was my business. Yeah. But then I also had her to help guide me and push me in the right direction. So yeah, she's amazing. I love her to death.
I want to talk about Amy. I want to talk about your very first hire, which was the flight instructor. But while we are on the subject, if you could share a little bit about the story of your husband, and why don't you share a little bit about how you met?
Oh goodness, I might actually cry if we talk about that, but we can talk about it.
You could briefly share with us a little bit about him, and then what happened.
He was a skydiver. Okay. And so we met at New Cavu restaurant in Wallkill.
Oh, I know New Cavu. Yes.
And so they used to do the Friday night accuracies. I don't know if they still do. And so he was part of the skydive team that was there. And I was brought on to do helicopter rides at the same event. And so I was just like, okay, I'll figure it out. And he's like, well, let's meet and talk about, what we're going to do so nobody gets injured. I was like, yeah, okay, sure. And I was not interested. I'm very business. Anybody that knows anybody, I'm like business. And so he's like, okay, well, I'm going to stop by and we'll talk about what should we put on the tables? What should we tell people? How do you want to operate? Whatever. He's like, I'm going to come over and we'll have dinner and we'll talk about it. I didn't think anything of it, right? So he shows up, he brings flowers, he brings dinner, he brings a toy for my dog, a bottle of wine, the whole thing, right? So I'm like...
He knew what he was doing.
Oh my God, yeah. And so honestly, it was the dog toy that got me. The rest of them, I'm like, yeah, okay, whatever. Anybody can do that. But he thought about my dog. And so he brought her a toy and it was very sweet. And so that was when we met and started hanging out. And at the time, 2-3 months, I was like, I'm not dating this guy. I'm not doing it. He really wants to date me, but I am not into it. So I finally caved and we did it. And then we were together, 3 years, 2.5 years. We got married. And then we were married 1.5 years. And he was a skydiver, an airplane pilot. He was working towards his flight instructor for airplanes. He wanted to be a helicopter pilot. I told him he had to pay for it because that's how I am. And then he was a mechanic as well. So he helped me with the maintenance side of the business, but he really flew and skydive. That was his thing. Mm-hmm. So he was flying for a skydive company up in Saratoga. I think it was Gansevoort, so a little bit further north and east of Saratoga. And they were doing a banner tow. Now, he hadn't done a banner tow in about a year. And so I was supposed to be on that flight with him. And I got a call last minute from a student, said, hey, I have some time. Can you fly? So I asked him, I said, I don't really want to go up, 2-hour drive there, 2-hour drive back just to go fly in the airplane with you if I can make money. So I'm going to go to work. Are you okay with that? He's like, yeah, that's fine. So it was supposed to be him, myself, and the dog all doing this flight. The dog and I stayed home. He went up to do the flight. Banner tow. So he took off in the airplane, flew around. He had another passenger on board. Everything was fine with the airplane. Came back in, picked up the banner, had everything set to climb out in the airplane. And the airplane never climbed. It just never took off. It stayed at like 100 feet and just never climbed out. So at the end of the runway to the left was a field that he could kind of land off on, because in front there were a bunch of houses and trees. To the right were trees. So he went towards that field, and just where he ended up being, there was a house and a tree with a power line sort of near it. And he went closer to the tree to avoid hitting the house. And the left wing caught the top of the tree, and it was just enough to flip, like they spun and then went inverted and landed on the engine in the cockpit. So, that was, I think it was like 6 or 7 o'clock at night in August. It was August 2nd, 2014. And I remember I came home from my flight and I took the dog out in the yard and brought her back up, and she threw up. And I was like, that's weird. So I texted him, I'm like, hey, did you feed the dog? No response. And I'm like, okay, well, I'll feed her and whatever. And I got this feeling, and I was like, something's not right. I don't know what it is. And I called him, no answer. I text again, no answer. And then I see, I'm like, oh, I have a missed call from a 518 number. That's weird. So I listen to it, and it's the guy who owns the drop zone. He's like, Heather, you have to call me. I'm like, why would I have to call him? That's weird. So at that point, I just got in the car, threw my dog in the car. I didn't know anything. I start driving up. I hit what's north of Catskill. Well, it was kind of the Catskill exit, Coxsackie, whatever. And I remember I had so many signs. Now, I don't know if you believe or don't believe in afterlife or signs or any of that stuff, but there were definitely signs. Like there were so many things that happened. And I got the call, and he said that, he had passed. And I just, that my entire world imploded, totally imploded. And so I think I called, it was either my mom first or my operations manager first to let them know. I think it was my mom. And then I called him. And so Amy would have been the third one. And so I remember telling Matt, like, this is what happened. And he was like, he had no words. He didn't even know what to say. And everyone was like, just stop the car, pull over. Like, we'll come get you. I'm like, I can't stop. I cannot. I have to get there. So I just drove all the way up there. And I got there like just as the sun was setting, and you could see like the wreckage and everything. And death is interesting. It brings out some interesting things in people. Yeah.
And his name?
Marius. Well, that was technically his middle name. So it was Cyprian Marius Ivashku. Yeah. So everyone called him Marius. Yeah. Yeah.
What were some of the signs that you saw?
Oh, goodness. So while he was alive, I used to see 2 red-tailed hawks cross my path every single day. Every single day. I'm driving up the highway. There's only one now. So that was the first one. The second sign is as I get the call, I literally watch 2 lawn chairs come off of the overpass and land on the highway, like right as I'm passing. And I was like, that was weird. Like, why 2 lawn chairs? God, I feel like there was so many more. When I scattered his ashes, there was, I could show you pictures. It was unbelievable. Yeah. But yeah.
It's, it's funny. We were talking about being present.
Yeah.
And it's interesting when you think about the signs. There's signs always. There's always signs around us. And sometimes in these moments of tragedy, we are just more present and are seeing these things happen. Yeah. And I know he's in peace now. And
Honestly,
thank you for sharing that with us.
A lot of people, I started flying. It was probably 2 weeks. I shouldn't have flown that soon after he died, but a month after he died, I was still flying. I still fly, obviously. And a lot of people asked, how can you still fly? Like, your husband died in an airplane accident. How can you still fly? And I was like, well, how can I not? Right. I feel closer to him. Most people who have lost somebody, when they go flying, they say those exact words to me. I feel closer to that person when I'm up in the air. And he died doing what he loved. Like, I would much rather die doing something I loved than be in a hospital bed. It's a privilege to be old, and die. But I wouldn't take that away from him. I would much rather he died doing something he loved.
I really like that you just said that too, about being closer to the person while you're doing it and doing something that you love. It goes back to the entrepreneurial journey of doing what you love. And that I think so many people relate, it is scary to quit a job. It is scary to go out on your own. And at 25, it's probably not as scary, although depending on different people's anxiety levels at 25, there's less risk maybe at 25. Let's put it that way, right?
Perceived risk, perhaps.
Perceived risk, exactly. But it's scary to be an entrepreneur, and some do equate it to life and death. Some do equate it to that. So that's the entrepreneurial journey too, is doing what you love. And much rather, like you said, with flying the helicopter, I'd much rather do something I love and maybe even fail, right? Yeah. And like you said with your husband, right? And maybe even crash, right? I'd rather do that than to not try and not to do it at all.
100%.
And I think that speaks to any journey we have in our lives, is that to do that, because otherwise you're crippled. Otherwise you're crippled and you stay in the job, the 9 to 5 that you hate. You stay in the relationship that you hate. You stay in the world that you hate. And then to what? To this, like you said, get old and die in a bed by yourself? Yeah. Not worth it. No. Not worth it at all.
And literally all because of fear. Yeah.
Yeah. So what a great story, and what a great way to then go off and, as you said, and grow your business and channel that grief into positive energy, which is really tremendous. My story that I have that I can only relate to it at no level of yours would be with skiing. For me, I had a major skiing accident. I've been skiing since I was like 4, and I had a major skiing accident in 2005 when I was I think 20 or 21, and I tore my arm out. And I don't have a shoulder muscle anymore or anything. And I still ski today. I love skiing. And I still go down my expert slope and fly and do all the crazy things that I do, but I love it, right? But I'm not going to go skydiving because I don't love it and I don't know it.
Yeah.
So, but it's the things that you love, right? What's the point of the winter for me in the snow if I don't go skiing?
Yeah. But to that point, how do you know you don't love it if you've never done it?
100%.
You know,
100%.
So I love these people that are like, oh, I can't go fly. I'm too afraid, or I don't want to die today. And I'm like, okay, A, I do it for a living, so please don't say that to me. Yes. But B, how do you know unless you've tried it?
Right.
If I love it this much, let my passion, my love for it feed you a little bit, so that way maybe you can also then love it. And if you don't, that's okay, but try it.
I think that's a great thing to talk about, because when we talk about the entrepreneurial journey, it's very similar to this conversation that we're having. So for me, the way I look at it is, and I think everybody looks at it this way, it's kind of weighing out the pros and the cons of something, as you said, skydiving. And I think this is a very good one to stay on for me, that is, because one of my goals was to go skydiving, and then I've retracted from that goal because I was like, well, it's not worth it to me. And what I mean by that, and I think that when someone looks at their entrepreneurial path too, of is it worth quitting my job and going there and doing this or not, right? And what I mean by that is, I only wanted to skydive because it was a check on a bucket list.
Yeah.
I've never had this inner desire of I want to jump out of a plane. It was more of well, my brother's done it. I know people have done it. People have talked about the experience, and it'd be really cool to do.
Yeah.
And so that's why it was one of these things that I had put on a bucket list. But then when I look at my life and the things that I'm doing and that I really want to do, if I break my knees, if it doesn't work out, it's not worth it compared to the other things I really enjoy doing, versus using skiing as the example there. If I take a mogul jump, which I just did recently in Lake Placid, take one and do whatever I can to get as high as I can on that jump and land and break my leg or something, I did it while I was doing something I really love.
Yeah.
And I look at it and I go, I know I looked at that mogul jump. I know I went by it 3 times. I watched 3 other people go off of it. I went off of it slowly 3 times. And then finally, when I decided to really take the leap and take the jump, maybe I landed wrong and broke my leg. I can look at it that way and rationalize it.
Yeah.
Whereas I wouldn't be able to rationalize, I went skydiving to
check the box.
To check the box, and I broke my leg. It would, and I think to relate it to the entrepreneurial journey of don't quit your day job to start a business because you feel that it's cool to become an entrepreneur today.
Yeah.
You have to look at it and go, is this really what I want to do? And I think back to your point about helping the students, who am I serving?
Yeah.
Who am I helping by doing this? I think that's so important, because when you're in the throes of what you're doing, when the challenges are in front of you.
When it gets harder, because it does.
Yeah, right?
Yeah. I always tell people, let passion lead the way, right? So if you're not passionate about what it is that you're going to leave your 9 to 5 for, then maybe you don't have the passion to keep going down that path as it does get harder, or as those struggles, challenges, et cetera, come your way. And people feel that, as a client or student, in my case, they feel whether you're passionate about what you're doing or not, honestly. Yeah. So I think having that, I've said, people are always like, you should do drones and you should add that to your business. I'm like, I don't want to do drones. I'm not passionate about drones. And I felt like if I was going to add drones to my business, then it wouldn't be successful because I don't have that passion for it. Because
it's not what you're planning out to do. But passion. There was a study done, and I forget by who, and I feel like it had to do with the Harvard Business School. And it had the point of this is just that the study that was done was they were studying successful entrepreneurs versus, well, not entrepreneurs, but their businesses, successful entrepreneurial businesses versus the ones that fail. Mm-hmm. And what is it, right? And as a whole, what it came back down to was the word grit. Just grit,
I love that word.
Just perseverance, grit. Mm-hmm. And when I think of the businesses that I've had that have failed, it's because I just didn't stick it out. I just didn't see it through. And that's every business that you could think of. It's because that person saw it through. Mm-hmm. And it's the passion. Yeah. It's they're serving someone, they're serving something, and then they're seeing it through the hard time. They're not closing their door on the hard time.
Oh, yeah. So if I can tell a story about that.
Please.
Yeah.
That's why you're here.
Grit is like my middle name. So we built a hangar recently. And so I broke ground 2018. Prior to that, I was leasing space from a company at Stewart Airport. And I had said to them, hey, we want to expand. I need to renew my lease for the contracts that we have with the FAA, et cetera. And they said, cool, you don't really fit our business model. They didn't say this exactly. I'll paraphrase and maybe to their default. But they basically said that we don't fit their business model anymore. They really wanted to do more jets. And from a business standpoint, I completely understood. I was like, okay, you make more money. It's less work for you. I get it. We don't fit anymore. However, we're a small business. I needed them, right? So I was like, well, you're going to have to bear with me because I can't just move. I need to figure out what I'm going to do. We looked at a bunch of different places. There was nowhere else for us to really go unless I was going to build. In order to build at Stewart or Dutchess or Orange County Airport, which is the local 3 airports that we would have built at, I would have had to lease land, build my building, and then eventually lease that building. And I'm like, that's not a good business move from my point of view. So I'm going to find land instead and build my own building. I'll own the land, et cetera. As a huge undertaking for someone who started with $25 who really has no clue what she's doing. So this is 2000, I think that was 17 or 16. I think we started that conversation with them, probably 17. And they said, okay, yeah, we'll hang on. And I was like, good, because it would be a bad PR move for you to like, kick me out. But I didn't say that. But anyway, so I found land right at Stewart Airport, thank God. And I bought 3 acres and built our hangar there. And I can remember going through that process and so many things went wrong. You don't know what you don't know, and I thought that I had good mentors and good people, good contractors that were going to help me through the process. And I got taken for quite a ride, and you learn a lot. So it was an expensive lesson is what I like to tell myself. Yes. But there were several times where I was like, I'm going to lose the business. I'm going to lose this building. I'm going to, owe these people. I'm going to be, in debt. There's so many. I went super down the rabbit hole and thought every bad thing that I could think of. And I try, and everyone will say this, I think, about me, is that I try and keep a very positive attitude. And I will put a positive spin, the silver lining on everything. And so I just kept that grit, trudging through it. And I was like, I can do it. And I did everything. I was doing all kinds of praying. I was asking my mentors. I was trying to cut corners everywhere I could, not only within the building and the financing, but within my business itself. Like, how do I, okay, let's not spend the money on, more paper for the printer if we don't need to. Let's not spend the money on, this new whatever thing I need, whatever it was. I just tightened everything down. And we made it through it, thank God. And honestly, due to a couple people who really believed in my business and helped me through it, because I couldn't financially take care of it on my own. And they've now since been paid off. It was like a line of credit that I took care of. And yeah, it was honestly very, very scary for a good 2 years. Because 2018, we broke ground. 2018 was really good. 2019, I ended up firing the contractor in January. The building sat unfinished for 6 months. Like, I was just watching it rot for 6 months through the winter and cringing every time I flew over, because of course we're still flying up the road from it. And I had a contractor who was like, yeah, we're going to help. Well, 6 months go by. And I'm like, well, what are you going to do? Like, what's going on? And so finally, June, we started building. And then it was June the following year we got our CO. So June of 2020, right in the middle of COVID, we're moving into our brand new building. And with COVID going on at the same time, I literally laid off all my staff and penny pinched everything again. And so we had this, tightening, this constriction. Then we got into the building and we're still in this constriction mode. And if I didn't have the grit, the passion, the perseverance to get through it, I probably would have quit, 2019 easily, if not way before then, because there were several other times prior to that I almost lost the business. And I just refused to quit.
Yeah, you really start to see why people don't do it, right? When you're in it, I'm going through an SBA loan process, which is probably
my God, I went through that.
Not as grueling as what you just
I went
described.
through the SBA loan process, and then I didn't end up doing the SBA because the fees and everything else on top of it. I was like, I'll just tighten down the budget and I'll get it through my local bank. Yeah. Well, the SBA was not fun.
It's so I'm going through that right now, and I'm seeing why. So for me, my backstory is I worked for Yellow Book, selling Yellow Page advertisements to businesses businesses like yours, right? And I would remember, I think about this now, I would go into a business like yours, like many like independent businesses and entrepreneurial businesses, and speak to the business owner about getting more business and getting more customers. And don't you want to get the right customer? Don't you want to grow and expand? And I remember walking out of these businesses. Some of them would yes, they were 100%. Yep, they'd buy the big ad and everything. And then many of them, for the most part, would say to me, no, I don't want to grow. I don't want to expand. And I'd walk out going, what is wrong with that guy or girl, right? And why don't they want to grow or expand? And now that I'm in it, and now that I meet people like yourself that are in it, we learn that growing and expanding is just as challenging as shrinking, and just as scary and just as hard. But it just goes back to grit of like, gotta have the grit.
Yeah. Honestly.
Right?
Yeah.
Let's go back to I want to talk about your coach, because I'm sure she helped you through a lot of that right there, which we need to talk about, the banking and everything that you went through with the contractors and tightening. Yeah. But let's go to your first flight instructor.
The one that I hired.
Yeah, the one that you hired. I'm interested in this first hire and finding this person, what they brought to the table, what now based off of your facial reaction, what they didn't bring to the table, what mistakes you may have learned from.
So many. Yeah, so many.
Let's talk about that first hire.
God, I'm trying to remember who exactly was my very first one. And I think it was this guy. He had come up from another school down Long Island, and they stopped for fuel. Everyone that's down in the city in Long Island, they think that Stewart Airport or the Hudson Valley is like no man's land. Like, nobody's up here. There's no business up here. How can you run a business? What made you think that the Hudson Valley would be a good place to be? And I don't know. I've just always just been here.
Did you grow up here?
No, I grew up just outside of Albany.
You grew up outside
New York, but Albany.
So and just a side note for you, why this framework of thinking here. I grew up in Queens, and yes, when you grow up in the 5 boroughs, you think that there is no world that exists outside of the 5 boroughs. Yeah. And I will tell you, my father, who grew up in Brooklyn, used to calls Brooklyn the center of the universe.
Oh, my goodness.
And for me, I never thought I would leave Queens. And I remember when I first moved up here, and we're in Poughkeepsie for our listeners, in Poughkeepsie, New York. When I first moved up here, I was like, man, the sticks and all of these people, these farmers. So and I remember seeing sheep and cattle, and I was like, where am I? So yes, and that thinking does not, I've changed because I've lived here for so long, but my father still comes in and he goes, Michael, you're starting an insurance agency here. We're all the customers. We're all the people. So hence back to your people stopping off in Stewart Airport.
And in fairness, we're only a half an hour flight away from the city, so it's not that far away.
We are very close to the city.
Close. So, it's not the sticks.
We are 80 miles from New York City.
I love when people call it upstate. No. Albany is upstate. And even further north than that is upstate. This is not upstate.
Yes.
That's because I grew up there.
We do call it upstate.
I know. But anyway, so he had flown in, and he had a photographer on board, and they didn't even know that I was there. And so they stopped for fuel and met me. And of course, helicopter pilot to helicopter pilot were like, oh my God, who are you? How are you doing? Like, we're just instant friends, right? So he got my contact, I got his, and he was like, listen, I'm going to leave the job that I'm at. Do you need any help? And I said, yeah, sure. So he came up, he worked for me for probably 6 months, maybe even less than that. He had broken his back, and they had said, well, you're going to need back surgery. Now, prior to working for me, obviously. And so while he was working for me, they're like, you need to have back surgery. You will probably never fly again. So he had back surgery. I lost him. I had another guy who came and worked for me. He was awesome, by the way. He was really good. The second guy that came, I think he came down from, I want to say Canada, but maybe his girlfriend was from Canada. I don't even remember. I'm like literally blocking that memory. He was probably my first official hire. So he worked for me. I got him shirts. I spent the money on the shirt, which is a big deal for me to even spend money on a uniform shirt for him because I didn't even have any at that point. And I was trusting him with my helicopter, everything. And I didn't know any of the HR stuff I was supposed to do or payroll stuff I was supposed to do. So yeah, I dodged a bullet there, but that's a whole other conversation. I found out that he was taking my helicopter and landing it in places that he shouldn't be. And the way that I found out is because the state police called me and they said, hey, your helicopter is here. Did you know that? And I was like, no, I didn't know that. And so then I went on his social media and found pictures that he had taken doing a lot of things that he shouldn't have been doing near the helicopter, with the helicopter, in the helicopter. And so I confronted him about it and told him that I'm sorry, you can no longer work here. We ended up getting into a screaming match, and he called me all kinds of things. It was not good. And you don't know what you don't know, And so I really wish that I had taken some HR courses or learned how to, have that conversation with people, because hiring and firing is probably the hardest part about, the people that work for us anyway. So he was the second one. The third one, was a student of mine that worked for me. Awesome guy. He worked for me for probably a year and a half. He had his flight time in. He wasn't a great instructor. He was an awesome pilot. And I told him, I said, listen, you have the hours now. Go and find a job down in New York City or wherever else it is, because 1,000 hours is the magic number. I said, take that job and go somewhere else, and be a pilot rather than an instructor. I think it'd be a much better fit for you. And so he left. And I said, listen, if you don't get a job, it doesn't work out in 3 months, come back. I will totally rehire you. We'll do the same thing all over again. But I want you. He needed that push. He was just that kind of personality that needed to be kind of pushed out of the nest. So he did that. And then he ended up not flying anymore, didn't come back. I don't really talk to him much anymore. But from what I hear, he's working for the NYPD now as a cop, not as a pilot, which is a shame because he's a really good pilot. And then... Yeah, I mean, I've hired so many people. Those are my first three. We go on and on, but yeah.
We don't. Actually, I do want to go to what makes a good pilot. So that's interesting because you have three that you just spoke about, but you're speaking about him as he was a really good pilot. So what is it about a really good pilot?
So there's a lot of things. First and foremost, I would say safety, but safety to the point where they're not frozen because of it. You know what I mean? Like there's educated decisions, and then there's I'm so afraid I can't make a decision. So safety is the number one for us. And so if you're a safe pilot, you can tell by the way that they maneuver with the controls themselves. There's a finesse about it versus a jerkiness. There's decision making. So will they go up and fly in really windy conditions or icing conditions, which they shouldn't. And the guy that I ended up with the screaming match, he would do those things. He would just go fly because he wanted the hours. He didn't care if it upset the student or the client. He didn't care if he crashed the helicopter. He didn't care if he upset me or did anything that was against my own policies and procedures. So that was the guy who I didn't keep, obviously. But the other guy was like, I will do whatever you need me to do. I'm always here for you. And safety is number one.
Safety is number one. When you say he wasn't afraid to crash the helicopter, do you mean that in a way like, are there like fender benders in the air kind of thing? Or,
Not really.
So it's you crash it, you're done. Game over.
Well, yeah, not like dead, but yeah, the helicopter's pretty much done.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But he just didn't have a concern is what you're saying.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
While you're speaking about that, I'm thinking, do you have any insight on the Kobe Bryant crash? Do you have?
Everyone brings that up.
Right?
Yeah.
How could I not? I'm a basketball fan and I still can't believe that it happened. But when you talked about going up in bad weather, a lot of the reports were that it was bad weather and he shouldn't have gone up.
Yeah. It's a shame what happened with that because the pilot and the aircraft were both capable of flying into the clouds and the certificate that they were operating under was not. So the choice that pilot made several times, if you listen to the audio and watch, because there's a
which I did, yeah.
There were at least 3 instances where he made the wrong decision.
Oh, wow.
And he pushed it. Now, a lot of pilots have type A personality. We are mission-oriented, get it done, whatever it is. And sometimes that clouds our vision. We don't make the best decisions. And I'm sure with the pressure of having someone like Kobe in the back, and that probably affected his decision making.
Sure.
But there were plenty of instances where he could have made a different decision.
You mentioned certificate. You said he had the experience, a helicopter, their certificate didn't. What does that mean?
So there's like a 141 certificate, a 135 certificate, Part 61. It's the FAA regulations that basically define what operation you're doing. So they were on a 135 certificate, which is a charter certificate.
Okay.
So within that charter certificate, it says whether you're able to fly in visual conditions or instrument conditions, meaning the clouds.
Okay.
If you're able to fly at night, all the different restrictions more or less that they would put on you. So that certificate was VFR only, meaning they could only fly in visual conditions, not in the clouds, even though the aircraft and the pilot were capable of doing it. And he could have it that's life and death, right? So you could still make that decision even though you're not on that certificate and just deal with the regulations later.
That's what I'm trying to figure out. Okay, so it's more of just a regulatory thing. But outside of that, he could have done it. What was one of the, you said there was 3 things that you noticed. What were some of those things?
So, well, there's so many. I don't know if I should even, I'm already down the road, so I'm going to go. They were trying to save time, right? So the flight would have taken, I think, 20 minutes versus 2 hours of driving, right? So they did the flight. If he had gone into the clouds, it would have taken them the same amount of time it would have taken them to drive, which is why he didn't choose to go into the clouds.
Okay.
So he's trying to save time. The first airport that he calls into, he's requesting a special VFR clearance, which means it's already bad weather, like it's below visual minimums. And whatever their certificate allows, I don't know because I didn't really look into it. But he went through the first airspace on a special clearance, which they have to clear the airspace. You're the only one that's allowed to maneuver in that airspace while that is going on. So he goes through the first airspace like that. I don't remember which if it was Van Nuys or Carlsbad or wherever they were. And then he goes through the second airspace, second controlled airspace. and they make him wait for 15 minutes to go through it because they have to clear the airspace so he can go on a special clearance as well. He had 15 minutes at that point. So he's already made 2 bad decisions. He had 15 minutes to make a different decision and still didn't. So when he went through that second airspace, now he had another decision to make, either follow the highway or go through the mountain pass. And he chose the mountain pass, and guaranteed it's because at some point, maybe multiple times, he's done that exact same thing and it's always worked out. And this time it didn't.
Okay.
As pilots, we do that. Like, we're like, oh, we got away with it once.
Right.
We can get away with it a second time. We may not get away with it a third time. And it's recognizing that you're pushing the limit and stopping that decision before you make it. That's what makes a better pilot, I would assume.
Yeah, I think that's a really good real-world example, which also gets related back to, again, our business and entrepreneurial journeys of the mistakes we make, learning from the mistakes, or following certain paths and knowing that we got lucky. Yeah. Learning that we got lucky, right? I mean, I meet people all the time who are successful and they don't know how they got successful. And that's scarier to me than the journey that I'm on, because I'm on a very planned journey, which isn't always great either. But I'm planning out with my coach, which we're going to speak about your coach in a second, planning it out with my coach, putting my team together. And so there's a plan to where I'm going and to the success that I'm looking to achieve. When I meet somebody who's successful and I say, tell me about how you got to be successful. Tell me about your story, your journey. And they go, I don't know. It just happened. That's scary. What's scary to me about that is it's great, right? One, good for you. I wish, you, yeah. Right? But what's scary is what happens when that curveball comes in? What happens when that challenge comes in? How do you know how to navigate? How do you know what's worked for you in the past? Yeah. How do you know to follow the freeway versus go through the mountains? Yeah. Right? It's such a real world example.
In fairness, I think I started my business with that whole leap of faith and figure it out as I go, which I've obviously said. And it's only been recently that I'm like, okay, I need to have more of a plan. And I don't know if that's because I've gotten older or wiser, whatever, or because now I have that team that's sort of helping guide me in the right direction. But I was very much okay, I've been successful so far. I don't know how. Yeah. And like I would throw spitballs on the wall. Like, oh, let's try this marketing. Let's try that advertising. Let's do this. Let's do that. And some worked, some didn't. And haphazardly, I got to where I am a little.
So at 25, what year was that?
2008 we started.
That was 2008. Yep. So so it took you till 2013 to stop throwing things at the wall.
Yeah, pretty much.
And in 2013 you met Amy.
Yeah.
So tell us about finding a coach and what impact it's had on your business. Because I think it's a direct correlation to this throwing stuff at the wall.
Yeah. So it's interesting. I had started my second location in 2013 as well, up in the Saratoga area, which is just north of Albany. And I had gone around and I had networked and met some people. And this one particular gentleman, Felipe, who's still up there, he was working with veterans at the time. I think he still does some of that. He's also in the banking world. And Felipe and I met because I wanted to help serve veterans as well. I was like, I want my VA certification, my 141. How do I do this? And I said, I need to talk to a guy who's helping veterans to really do this. So I met with Felipe. I remember it was at I think it's called Planet Cafe or something. It's this little coffee shop up in Saratoga. It's really good. And he sat down and he literally was probably the first guy to say to me what I need to do. And he's, okay, you need to contact this person, this person, this person, this person. This is what you need to do, da, 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 da. And he just laid it all out. It was like rapid fire. Write all this down. These are the contacts. Go. And I was like, I don't know. Okay, I'll just do that. So there were 2 Amy's on the list, Amy Amoroso and Amy DeWitowitz. Amy Amoroso I called first. She was the one who helped me get in with the Schenectady Community College to do the veteran program. She also helps veterans. She's also amazing. She's really a badass in the veteran community. She's phenomenal. And so I contacted her first. She helped me through that. And then I contacted the second Amy, which is Amy DeWitowitz. And I can remember calling Amy and being like, I don't know anything about you. I don't know who you are. I was told by Felipe to call you, and so I'm calling you. I don't even know why. And she's like, okay. And so we start talking, and I can remember she said to me, she goes, okay, for 6 months, it was like $12,000 or something like that, or some insane amount. And I was like, oh my God, that's a lot of money. Oh my God, I have no idea what I'm going to get out of this. And she basically gave me an ultimatum. She's like, do you want to grow your business? Do you want to take it to the next level or not? And if you do, then this is what you're going to pay. Figure it out. I was like, okay. She's like, you're just going to say yes. That's it. It was literally like I had to say, I had no option. It was, you're saying yes and that's it. And we'll figure it out. Yeah. And so that's what I did.
Well, she would tell you today that you had an option.
Of course she, I'm sure she would. But it didn't feel like it at the time. Right. And whether that was subconscious, whatever. And she was just such, how would I describe Amy in the beginning? She was like a bull, right? She would just like I needed that. I needed the tough love. I needed someone to just be straight up with me and to be.
Well, you weren't going to listen to somebody who was soft. That's for sure.
No, I'm not that kind of person.
No.
Yeah, no. If you got to be direct, and that's why my husband and I got along so well, because he was from Romania, so Eastern European, right? I need that direct, blunt, just go right for it kind of thing, because otherwise the soft, play around in the weeds doesn't work for me. Yeah, so that's how she was. And I remember the first 6 months we worked together, there was a lot of work to do. There was focus forms, there was goal setting, and she would always tell me, dream bigger, dream bigger. You're not dreaming big enough, dream bigger. And I was like, this woman's crazy. Like, I don't know if I can do this. And I went,
I'm in the clouds all day long. How can I dream bigger?
I can't really go any higher. Anyways, she invited me to an event down in Florida, and it was Laurel Langmeyer, and it was this, I don't remember some summit that I went to. And it was about marketing and advertising and growing your business and entrepreneurship and all these things. And so I leapt again without thinking, and I went down to Florida and spent the week with her. It was 5 days down there. It was the first time I had really been, somewhere without my husband and done anything like this, and really pushed myself outside of my comfort zone. And I learned a lot and listened to a lot of great stories and was sucked in very easily to the marketing and everything else. And there was some vibe that I got from her at the end of it where I was like, I don't know. I don't think I want to do this with her anymore. Like, maybe I need to find somebody else. Maybe I need to not do coaching. I don't know. It's a lot of money. And I was letting a lot of other people influence my decision making. Like, my accountant, for one, was like, why are you spending so much money on this person? Like, what are you getting out of it? You could spend that money on advertising and make more out of it. And I go back to my husband again. Like, if he had not died that day, he would have also convinced me to fire her and to not be with her. So there were a lot of blessings that came out of his passing, and she was one of them. Yeah. What
was one of your first goals that you wrote down with her?
Oh, I don't even remember now.
Okay.
I have so many. It's
maybe
been so
action
long.
items, and it doesn't have to be the first. When in that first
Honestly,
year?
I think it was an amount. I think she told me, she's like, how much do you want to make this year? And I said something silly. I was like, $2 million. I think we were doing $500,000 at the time. And
in business revenue.
Yeah. Yep. And we didn't make $2 million. I think I got to like 750 or 800, whatever. But what I have learned from that experience, and we do this now every year, it's just a goal that we set every year, and I call them BHAGs.
Yes.
Big, hairy, audacious goals. Yeah. And so I shoot for the moon and past the moon, and maybe I'll end up in the stars, and that's just as fine. Yeah. And so this has been our best year. 2021 was our best year that we've ever had in business. And I don't know if it's COVID, I don't know what it is, or if it's just that I finally got on I'm in the flow now.
Yeah. I want to speak about your flow. I want to speak about the budget, but let's go to BHAGs for a second, because I think people, Mel Robbins, are you familiar with her?
I know
Mel Robbins?
Name, yeah.
She speaks a lot about manifestation, and right now I'm learning more about manifestation, and it's really cool, but it has to do with the idea of shoot for the moon and you'll land among the stars, at least, right? You got to set these huge goals with the understanding that you may not achieve these huge goals, but it's important to set them so that you can start. And here's the part where Mel Robbins comes in her teaching, is that it's one thing to you set this goal, right? This manifestation that you start working towards, but without setting the plan and the action towards it, you're really just wishing, right? Yeah. So the BHAG, the difference between the two of a wish and a BHAG, or right, a big, hairy, audacious goal, is that now with your coach, which we'll talk more about, is that then you started setting the framework and the plan.
Actionable goals to reach.
Let's go ahead and say it.
Yeah, actionable goals to reach the end. That's really what it is. So a goal without action steps to get there is just a wish.
That's right.
Yeah.
So when we think about our business leaders, and when I speak about business leaders, I'm talking about the people that are working in the 9 to 5, that are looking to get into a managerial level, into a C-suite level. And that's just as wonderful and great and fulfilling as being an entrepreneur. And it's important to set those actionable goals to get to that level. So if you're a salesperson or a cashier, how do you become the manager, right? What are the goals, right? And maybe for you as the cashier, the goal is to run the entire franchise and run the entire Northeast region, right? That's great. Set that goal. But the first actionable step is to be the manager, the assistant manager, the night supervisor, the office, right? And move up the line.
And figure out what it is that it takes to get you to that next position, the next step, and the next step. I saw this great image. It was like, let's say the moon is at the top, right? And you have a ladder going to the moon. And there are these giant steps. And so you have one person that's taking these giant leaps to get to the moon. And then this other person has all these little steps. And they get to the moon so much faster because they're achievable steps to get to the big.
Achievable.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that that's also really important, that you're achieving all these little steps. And that's the other thing, because otherwise you get discouraged. You set this big, hairy, audacious goal and you don't get anywhere near it, which is much different than falling amongst the stars, right? You didn't even break the ozone.
It's discouraging, yeah.
Right. And it's discouraging. Yeah. So in that whole process is budgeting. And in that whole process is a big, hairy, audacious fee at the end of her services, right? Of 12 grand or whatever it is, right? Yeah. You could put any number on it because it's really in context of what the person's earning or whatever it is. If it was $5 grand and at the time you're not making that much, it's a lot of money, right? Or 100 grand, right? So the number doesn't matter. The point is that it was a lot. It was a lot for you at the time, and it was a lot of money that you could have either allocated towards marketing or saved
or insurance
or whatever it was, but you chose to put it towards coaching. What was part of the thought process in making that, which I'm very familiar with to some extent, but also I'm looking for some guidance. What was part of that? And then what did you get out of it? What you got out of it in terms of the financial?
That's a great question. So when I first, like I said, the first 6 months that, and then I renegotiated the contract again, and we did another 6 months after that, and it's been every year that I do a contract. But the first 6 months, it was more about changing my perception, how I speak, like choosing my words carefully, not only to other people, but to myself, really just molding who I was at the time, because now I feel like I'm a completely different person than I was even back then. But to create the person who I wanted to be, there were so many things that I had to change about me to then affect the business. So if I was living in this lack mentality or this fear mentality, that wasn't ever going to get me to my goals because I was just in that constant loop, that story that I just kept telling myself. And I grew up that way. I mean, I can remember being 20 and sending my parents $500 every week so that they could afford to pay their bills. And I can remember, like, I raised my 4 younger siblings. Like, it was not an easy childhood growing up. And I gained that lack mentality and that fear of never being good enough, never having enough being the word, from a very young age. And so when I first started working with her, it was really about molding me to change the way that I saw the world and the way that I interacted with the world, to then allow me, because I was the business, I still am the business, to then change the business to also not have that lack mentality, that fear mentality, and to really look at things from a different perspective.
That scarcity, right?
100%, yeah.
And so when we think about the budget, that affects the budget of the scarcity of I don't have enough to pay you, where money is abundant. Money's energy.
It is.
And it's all around us, right?
Yep.
And so we will find it. We'll find it in alternate ways. Yep. We'll find it through.
And it shows up. When you need it, it shows up. Like that 12 grand, like it just showed up. I couldn't even tell you how. Like, I can remember I needed something to do on the simulator. It was like another $10,000 bill. And I was like, I don't have 10 grand. I don't know what I'm going to do. And I can remember 3 students coming in and prepaying. And boom, there was my 10 grand in one day. Yeah.
That's
crazy.
Wild.
Yeah. It just, when you manifest, right? When you put the energy out there and it's in line with who you are and what you need and where you're going, it comes. Yeah.
Yeah.
But you have to get rid of those other fears and lack that surround it. That way I don't know. There's so many things I could talk about with that.
Well, you know what's interesting too, and we didn't get into your childhood as much as I typically do, but you just mentioned and how you supported your family. So that goes to that whole grit that you've always had. While we can look at it and say that the negative that came out of it was the scarcity mentality, the positive that came out of it was that you got the grit. So now you're learning how to get rid of the scarcity. Yeah. There's always going to be this yin and yang. Everybody's going to have it where they have a lot, they're abundant, but they don't have any grit.
Yeah.
So we're always going to have this yin and yang, and we got to find somebody to help us with it. I have a coach, Merritt Minnemeyer, and actually, in fact, one of the groups that we're working on, I'm in a group with her as well. And what we're working on is the scarcity mentality, is getting rid of I am enough, I'm not enough, and moving into I am enough, and figuring out what that means to us, and why did it start in the first place? Yeah. Why did we have this not enough mentality in the first place? And everybody's got a different story. Yep, for me, I learned through one of our walks, our mental walks, that is, I call them at least, was that for me, I always got in trouble in school. So for me, it was always trying to prove myself that I am enough, trying to prove to these teachers that thought I was just this, delinquent child, that I am enough. I'm going to be successful. I'm going to be good. But anyway, the coaching I think is huge, and it's a really great first step that you took.
And I didn't even realize it at the time. Like no one had ever said anything about coaching to me ever. And he didn't even tell me that she was a coach. I didn't know she was a coach until I started talking to her.
It is a hidden secret. I'm very fortunate. My CPAs that I'm bringing on for Den10, both of them, but one of them specifically is really heavy into coaching, into working with a coach and everything. So I'm very fortunate in that, because you just mentioned too, like the accountants see it as a line item. And it's true, because even mine, they looked at my coach's expense and they were like, whoa.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, I'm not sitting in this seat talking to you guys if I'm not meeting with her.
Yeah.
Because she's the one who's helping me expand my mind from being a business owner where I write all the policies, I live inside of my business and do the accounting and do the HR, everything that you talked about at 25 to 30 or 35 years old, do all of that stuff myself. My coach is the one who's having me expand and look at a different HR consultant, a different CPA consultant. She's not telling me to do any of that stuff like you said. Yeah. She's just a mirror to what I'm telling her I need, and then we're finding the answers together.
Yeah.
So I'm so happy that you found a really great coach and are working with her. We've spent a lot of time together. And so I think as we start to conclude, I'd like to hear a little bit about your foundation that you formed in your husband's name. And the other little thing that you mentioned too is about veterans. Yeah. And I'd love to hear your connection there too.
I'll probably start with veterans. We'll end with his scholarship,
sure.
I think. So there's a lot of veterans out there that want to learn how to fly, or they have GI Bill money that they want to use towards flying. And part of what we do in our business, part of why we also work with Dutchess Community College, that way people can go through the college to get student funding, et cetera, and then the VA benefits as well, because we had to have our certification through the FAA to get that. But I love working with veterans. We've hired veterans. We've trained veterans. They're awesome. I donate to veteran charities, cancer charities, and then my husband's charity. Those are the only three that I donate to every year. We get tons of asks, but those are the only three. So my father is a veteran with the Coast Guard. So I have a soft spot in my heart for them.
For veterans.
Yeah.
Let's stay to that for 1 second before we go to the foundation about donating to those only three, which is really important too, right? Because as business owners, people are knocking on our doors all the time. And I mean,
if you give a mouse a cookie.
What a great book.
Yeah.
My parents started a non-for-profit, and family members started a non-for-profit called Forgotten Children of Haiti in 93. And so I've always been in that world of asking for donations and looking for, because that's what we do, right? And again, going back to that Yellow Book story, right? Not understanding, going to a business owner, not understanding why they won't donate. The reason why I want to bring this up is because I think it's important for business owners to understand that you have to draw a line of like what you're gonna donate to, what the purpose is, and being able to draw that line, because otherwise you're just going to give away the house eventually. Yeah. So I would like
people get mad at you when you don't donate.
I would love for you to share a little bit of that.
Yeah. So when I first started the business, and even to this date, now we've got it more fine-tuned, but a lot of the reason that we've become successful, in my opinion, is because I donate, because I do community events, because I do community outreach, because I do so many free things for the community to really involve them in what we're doing, to share my passion.
Right.
That once I started donating, it would be like, hey, can you donate to my kids' pool that they're building at the high school? Hey, can you donate to my kids, she's racing horses or whatever.
All great causes.
Yeah. And I'm like, okay, that's cool. And I have a personal relationship with you. But if I can't afford to pay my own bills, I can't donate to you. So unless there's a big benefit to me, I just can't donate. Otherwise, I will have no more business, and then you will have no more donation, period. So I started fine-tuning it quite a bit to now just those three types of charities. And what I've told the other charities that ask for donations, because we get Catholic charities and hospice and all kinds of things, is that if you're doing an event and I can somehow participate in the event to give helicopter rides or to put a booth or something where there's some other benefit to my business to make donating that money or spending that time worth it, then I will do that, because I want to help every charity that I possibly can. Right. But unless there's a direct benefit to my business, I'm not giving out $300, silent auction gift cards anymore. I'm not doing it. There's no point to it. I want to give someone an experience. I want them to actually use it. I want there to be some benefit back to the business. That sounds kind of selfish, but I just feel like if you don't do that, then you can easily get yourself out of business. So yeah, cancer, I don't know why I chose cancer, other than I feel like everyone is somehow affected by it, my family included. So many cancer charities I donate to, specifically Leukemia and Lymphoma Society, just because I got wrapped up in them first. And then veterans, obviously, because I love veterans and they're awesome. So we do a Disabled American Veterans, DAV is the organization that we donate to and do an event with every year. And then my husband's charity. So if I segue into that now, when my husband passed, a lot of donations were made in his name. And I didn't know what to do with all the money. I was like, I'm going to use it to cremate him because I couldn't afford to cremate him and go through the services. When people die, it's expensive. So I used a lot of the money for that. I used some of the money to bring his family from Romania over to here so they could be there for the services and to take care of them a little bit. And then the remainder I put into the Community Foundation of Orange and Sullivan. And so they started the Marius Ivashku Aviation Foundation in his honor. And we just recently hit our $25,000, which is the minimum for perpetuity. So I don't have to fundraise anymore for it if I don't want to, because they take that money and reinvest it in perpetuity. And I give out $2,000 every year to aviation-related students. So whether you're training for airplane, helicopter, mechanics, whatever, I don't do skydivers because he was also a skydiver, but I feel like that's not necessarily a career. So I don't donate to that or give away to that. But those scholarships, we give out $2,000 every year. And we've had, I think, on average, only 5 applicants every year. So there's a lot of opportunity there for anybody who's looking for an aviation-related scholarship. But it was a way for me to carry on his legacy, his memory, his passion for aviation, along with my own.
Yeah. How can they find that scholarship if they're looking for it?
It's on the Community Foundation's website. It's also on my website. So it's cfos.org, I believe, and you have to search Marius and it would pop up. On my website, it's in our scholarships tab on independenthelicopters.com.
Yeah, in the scholarships tab.
Yeah.
And check it out, people. You got some free flights there that you can have.
I mean, you can do a lot with $2,000.
So before you created the foundation, my other question for you about giving back is along the lines of giving back. Why, right? Why do you as a business owner feel it's important to give back to your community?
That's a good question. I don't know if I have a great answer for you.
You don't have to. There's no great answers.
Well, so I'll tell you, this is kind of a related story. So inside my building, when I first started the building, I said I wanted to bring the community inside. We do so much of it. I really like being a part of the community and sharing what we do with other people. So we had a couple donations that came in for that. So on my wall, when you first walk in my lobby, is this wall of people's names that had donated to the hangar. Because I wanted to bring the community of people who love and adore what we do and who I also love and adore into the building so that way they can be a part of who we are. Yeah. So that's really the short story is I want to share so that way they can share.
I think that is a great answer. It's funny because we started the podcast off with talking about you giving to the community in the Taste of New Paltz. Yeah. Because, while people paid to go up, you did it at a very discounted rate, I remember. Yeah. Even though it still wasn't discounted enough for me to try. I was busy that day. Yeah. No, but it is so important to give back. Part of what my parents, the foundation that they laid down for me and in the non-for-profit and what I'm doing today, it's all about giving back. And I think that also gets us through the hard days, like what we talked about before, is like when you know that you're doing more than just earning an income. And that you are giving back to a community, and then that community comes and serves you too. It's a symbiotic relationship. Which, to your point of donating to a charity that doesn't give back to you, I think it's a really good point for anybody who's starting a charity, who's starting a non-for-profit or a foundation in any way, is to understand that it's really great that you're doing something for somebody else who has nothing or who doesn't have enough. That's wonderful. But when you go out and ask for the donation, make sure that that person is also getting something from it as well.
Energy for energy.
That's right. Because it's nice to give. We all want to give. But like you said, then you start chipping away at the stone and eventually there's nothing left. Yeah. And in order for it to continue, as you said, then there has to be that symbiotic relationship. So I'm really happy you brought that up.
There's also that, I remember going through and struggling, and if I can help ease someone else's pain going through that process, then I'll do that, and whatever that may be. So if it's, the cancer charities or the veterans or the whatever it is that I donate to, it's because there's a pain that I went through to kind of get to where I am. And what do they always say? Once you get to the top, your best thing to do is to turn around and help the next person up.
That's right.
So it goes in business, it goes in charity, it goes across the board. Yeah.
And so your mantra that you live by as we conclude is faith does not make things easy, it makes them possible.
God, isn't that grit in a statement? Yeah. I will honestly say that I started with, I leapt and faith that my wings would grow on the way down. And I feel like that's how I live. It's how I run the business. It's how I interact with other people, is that I have a lot of faith. I have a faith in humanity. I have faith in myself. I have faith in business. There's just, without it, I don't think I would be able to make it through what I've made it through.
That's wonderful. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on. I don't have any other fantastic questions for you. You've been such an amazing guest.
Thank you so much.
My only question for you that I would have at this point would just be, what's next for you, Heather?
Oh, that's a loaded question. Yeah, I have a lot of plans.
Good.
A lot of plans. You'll have to stay tuned.
Is Alaska in them?
No, actually. No. Warmer weather, hopefully.
Warmer weather.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah.
So I asked that question. It is a loaded question because there was so much in here that I would love to ask you more about. But to be respectful of your time and our listeners' time, I feel that we're going to need a part 2.
Maybe I'll tell you my plans then. Yeah.
I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for listening to The Michael Esposito Show. For show notes, video clips, and more episodes, go to michaelespositoinc.com/podcast.